Hello everyone. It is customary in Jewish tradition, we say Happy Chodesh, which means a happy new month, being that today was the second day of the new month of Elul. And in Jewish tradition we have a custom to make a blessing, the Shabbat and the Sabbath before a Rosh Chodesh, before the new moon. We actually bless the month, and we also sanctify the moon. The moon plays a very central role in the Jewish calendar, Jewish life. So briefly, a few words about that, because I guess it's a good introduction into the theme of this discussion, which is, what is healthy love? So if we had titled it, why do Jews bless the moon, maybe there'd be a lesser turnout here. And when you say, what is healthy love, you get people's attention. But the truth is, as we'll soon see, it's very much interdependent. It's just a matter of different words, different paradigms. So just a little trivia. There's a sun and the moon. We all know that, right? And we see the sun by day and the moon at night. As the Bible says, the sun, the Torah calls these two celestial bodies like kings, governors. One governs by day, one governs by night. And you may be familiar that there's extensive literature in Jewish scholarship about this whole moon and sun thing. Very fascinating material, which I'm not going to go into right now, but I'll just touch upon a few key points. So now, as we know, there's a thing called a solar calendar, and there's a lunar calendar. The Western world follows a solar calendar, which is the months January, February, basically a cycle of 365 days. And to balance it out, every 4 years there's a leap year where they add a day in February. The lunar calendar, by contrast, is a cycle that is 11 days shorter than a little more than 11 days shorter than the solar cycle, the solar year, in the sense that a lunar cycle, which means from the moment of a new moon till it waxes and wanes until it so-called dies before it's reborn again, is approximately 29 and a half days. Let's say 30 days, just to be even. 30 times 12 is not 360, it's more like 355 days. So basically you have a deficit of around 11 days every year. Now, interesting to note that there are no months when you really count the solar calendar. The months of January, February, March are simply imaginary months we created just for efficiency. In the lunar calendar, a month is a real month. At the end of the month, the new month is a new moon. The halfway month, the moon is full, and then there's the first quarter and there's the third quarter. So the moon actually is a far more accurate measure of months than is the sun. The sun does come back, which is what they call the moment where the year ends. Once a year there's a cycle, but there is no such thing as months in the solar cycle. Nothing happens to the sun, nothing happens anywhere except on our calendars when January ends, or when February ends, or when July or August ends. In the lunar calendar, the months are very precise. And actually in the lunar calendar, there's no real year. It's just months all the time. It's just cycles of the moon. Nothing happens at the end of a year, so to speak, to the moon. So, different calendars. The Western calendar is a solar calendar. The Jewish calendar I'll get to in a moment. The Muslim calendar, for example, is completely lunar calendar, which is why their holidays come out at different seasons because of the deficit. So 11 days 1 year is not that much. The next year is 22 days, then it's 33 days. And we're given 10, 15 years, suddenly a holiday that was in winter can end up being in the summer. And the Jewish calendar is unique that we reconcile the solar and the lunar. This is based on a principle. The Torah says that you shall designate your holidays by the moon. That's why, for example, Passover, Sukkot, Purim, these are all designated on full moons. There's a full moon, there's a holiday. Passover is the 15th of the month of Nisan, always the full moon of that month. Sukkot is the full moon of Tishrei. So, we know that we designated by the moon, but there's a statement in the Torah that sometimes says that the Passover should be in the season called the spring, Chodesh HaAviv, in the spring season. Now, seasons are determined by the sun, not by the moon. So the sages derive from that there has to be some way to reconcile the two. And therefore, in the Jewish calendar, you have every 19 years, they have 7 leap years. This keeps the balance of the 11 days deficit balanced. So every 19 years, there are 7 leap years. Basically, every 3-4 years, there's a 7 into 19. Every 2-3 years, there's a leap year. But a leap year in the Jewish calendar, in the Hebrew calendar, is an entire month is added, not a day. So basically, if every 3 years you add a month of 30 days, you're more or less balancing out the deficit of the 11 days. Now, you may think, who really cares? What difference does all this make? It sounds like astronomical, maybe it's interesting trivia, but it has fundamental difference, and it's very relevant to our discussion that we're going to talk about love. The differences are following. So you have the 3 calendars. The Western world, basically the Roman calendar, Gregorian calendar, is solar. The Muslim calendar is lunar. I believe the Chinese calendar is a whole other story. I'm not sure how they work. I think it's also lunar, actually. And then the Jewish calendar is lunar, but reconciled with the solar. So holiday Passover will always be in the spring. That is in Israel and in this hemisphere. Obviously, in the lower hemisphere, you can't have it both ways. So in Australia or South America and so on, their winter is summer here, so etc. So that obviously shifts. Now, the reason for it is quite a very fascinating and very simple reason. First of all, it's fascinating. These calculations were made not last year, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, long before we had any instruments, any satellites, any travel to outer space. Hillel, one of the great sages in the time of the Talmud, we're talking about close to 2,000 years ago, was known to be maybe one of the greatest astronomers and mathematicians, and he calculated till the end of time all these deficits, obviously through studying and through observation, but he did it without any equipment that you would have today, and every calculation he made has never been disputed till this day. It's that accurate, and that's what we follow. Now, what's the reason behind this? So simply put, the moon and the sun, like anything in this world, are essentially, think of them as metaphors. I mean, they're physical entities, but they're lessons to us. Essentially, one of the ways that the Kabbalists, the mystics, explain the universe, is the universe are essentially God's fingerprints. They're all signposts to remind us of a higher reality. You know, we're all always looking for some transcendence, for some reminder, for some answer to our questions. So there's an expression in the book of Job. It says, "Mipsari, from my flesh I behold God." Study yourself. Stand in the mirror instead of preening, and on a vein level, study your being, and you'll understand God. Because who shaped you? You want to understand the artist, you have to look at the art, and in the art lies both overt and hidden messages about your life, about who you are, about everything you need to know. And then if you broaden not just yourself, you broaden the picture into studying nature and studying the fascinating different systems in nature. You know, people are fascinated by nature today. They have cameras that observe life that once we could never observe, underwater, plants. You have these nature shows. They're fascinating. Oh, like miraculous to see, and to see different systems, how one type of family, one type of animal survives this way, another one a different way. They work together with each other. The close-ups we have today are just unbelievable, observing things that were once impossible to observe. But one last step that's missing, it's one of my dreams, is to add that dimension, is what's the lesson to our lives. You know, all that's fascinating. You get a fascinating peek into nature. I would just add 5 minutes at the end of all these shows and say, okay, so what's the psychological lesson from the way, let's say, penguins protect their young, or from the way plants interact with each other? Everything has lessons. And these are not lessons you have to force. They're lessons that come directly out of nature. And frankly, all technology is really copying nature. What's a camera if not copying the human eye? And an airplane, the bird. And the list goes on. Nature, if you want to be an innovator, just study nature. Well, it was all innovated already. And then you could create and copy it into our lives. Of every great invention you'll see is some form of copying nature. You know, the joke they say, the scientist who claimed to be an atheist, so he's arguing with God. You know, atheists have a way of arguing with God. There's that atheist that once wrote, that said, I hate you as if you existed. You know, that type of thing. So, you know, atheists actually have a relationship with God, because they're like, you know, others just take it for granted. They're at least fighting about it. It's like, you know, a family feud. So there's the scientific atheist that turns to God and says, anything you can do, I can do. So God said, okay, show me. So he takes a little earth and he's going to show how he can use the earth to create his own plants and so on. So God says, no, use your own earth. You forgot, there's a expression used, there's yesh mi yesh. Yes, we can take things and reshape them, and even reshape them in ways where you can go to intellectual property court and prove it's your original creation. But is it really original? You took something that was just raw and you shaped it a certain way. So yes, we value that as well. I'm not dismissing it. But let's not confuse that with yesh ma'ayin, which means taking something from nothing and creating something. So the point I'm making here is that nature is the best teacher. So if maybe it's one of the reasons when we're despondent, or we just go to the beach, or we study, look at a sunset. In some way, it soothes us. But if you go a step further, you actually can have answers to your questions when you look at this thing called what we call nature, Mother Nature. Which actually the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, interesting thing. He says nature is a word we use when we can't explain something. We just say that's the nature of it, as if it's some answer. Some people, nature is just replacing the word God. So they call it Mother Nature. Except, I should mention, in insurance policies. They never say it's acts of nature. They say acts of God. I think the reason for that is because you can sue them if it's acts of nature. If it's acts of God, they have a scapegoat. They say, we don't cover you for acts of God. Acts of nature, let's say, 1 second, why is it my responsibility? Maybe it's yours. Acts of God, you simply say it's God, hurricanes, tsunamis, So God is used conveniently when necessary. Look at your insurance policy. Every insurance policy has acts of God. I don't think it's because of statement of faith. It's really I think it just really defines that it's not our problem, basically. When it comes to money, I guess suddenly God becomes a very convenient scapegoat. But anyway, getting back to our point here, so nature has lessons to us, tremendous amount of lessons. So you look at the sun and the moon, which are both two obvious forces in literature, in poetry, in romance. These sun and moon are often used as symbols in many different ways. So one thing that jumps out very obvious, the difference between the sun and the moon, and we know this today very vividly, and the Talmud talks about this again, long before man landed on the moon and long before many of the new discoveries have been made. The moon is essentially a reflection of the sun. It's reflecting sunlight. And the angle, the way is juxtaposed to Earth, that determines the cycles of the moon. But the moon is more than just a reflector. It's not just a mirror image. Because you see the moon has its own type of message, has its own, I would say, haunting message. For example, you'll see two people love each other, you won't never see them staring at the sun, but you'll see them gazing at the moon. Even with sunglasses, that is, with the sun. The moon has its own type of, it has the shadowy, like I said, haunting element. Of course, there's the myths of the werewolf to the full moon, but and the moon affects the tides on Earth, and there are actually plants that grow to moonlight and won't grow to sunlight. The moonlight has its own effect on them. So the moon and sun represent two so-called archetypes. The sun, you see, is consistent light, even though there's sunspots and it goes through shifts, but they're very not visible to the naked eye. For all practical purposes, the sun is just a blazing force of light and heat that without it there would be no life on Earth, period. The moon has a completely different type of role. As I said, it affects some of life, but the moon's light is far more gentle and far more, as I said, mysterious actually. Just study it, you see, it has a certain mysterious feel to it. So the way the Kabbalists explain the sun and the moon, they explain that they represent two levels in the spiritual realms and also two levels within us. So, to simplify it, I'll just say this. The sun represents essentially the giver, and the moon represents the recipient, the receiver. So teacher, student, parent, child. In case of a romance, it could be either man or woman, but usually there's either one. But it's about giving and receiving. And each has its own quality. Another distinction is that the sun is consistency. It's consistent. The moon goes through phases, through changes. It's subject to the cycles of time. Very often women relate more to the moon in the symbolism of this than men do. Simply even through their biological cycles. Since much more in touch with the cycles of time than the so-called masculine energy. So there's consistency, not to say that all men are consistent. That's not my suggestion here. We're not talking about men and women per se. We're talking about masculine, feminine again, archetypes, personality. The fact is, all of us have both elements, both masculine and feminine. So it's not about men and women per se. It's just conceptual. So let's talk about relationships for a moment. In relationships, what's more important, consistency or novelty? Well, depends who you ask. Those are answering that have more experience. That's why you're saying that. Because, like for example, and you find this often, there's two different personalities. You'll find people, when it comes to relationship, they're like, or in any given situation, they're like clockwork. A time is a time, a promise is a promise. You can rely on them, absolutely. On the other hand, you have people who are far more spontaneous. They're always late. A promise is not a promise. But on the other hand, they can be very exciting because of their nature. That's how they are. A very consistent person can end up being very boring. Clerks are very consistent people. They go by the clock. And we know in relationships, in marriage and love, you want to have also an element of spontaneity. You want an element of a spunk. Some of the most exciting people are also the ones you can't rely on, which is, I assume, why some people said, I'd rather have consistency than the excitement of the roller coaster. The interesting thing is, some people that's called the sun personalities, and there's moon personalities. A sun personality is a consistency, but it doesn't have the element of renewal necessary. It can be very consistent, it can become also monotonous. The moon, on the other hand, doesn't have consistency, but it's constantly going through cycles, constant change. So, I'm not getting into the other calendars. The Jewish calendar the Torah recognizes the need to balance the two. That in a real healthy relationship, you need both. If you just have consistency, pure consistency, you'll have reliability, but you're not going to have the excitement. You're not going to have the passion that comes with tension. I'm talking about healthy type of tension. So I understand if you had to choose both, you may choose that one. But it could also die, simply becomes like people say, my relationship is lifeless. He's consistent, but there's no excitement anymore. So the challenge is, how do you maintain both of them? So here again, nature teaches us. Let's take a tree, for example. Is a tree built on consistency or on growth? So on one hand, a tree has a solid trunk with very deep roots. That's the key to a tree. Without that, a tree will not stand. But at the same time, the tree is always growing upwards and branching out. And every season, new branches, new flowers, new fruit, and so on. And the interesting thing is, even though these two similarly paradoxical qualities, they're interdependent. To put it in poetic terms, the deeper the roots, the more powerful, beautiful the fruits. Even though the roots grow down and the fruits grow up, which is like the tree is the only thing that grows in both directions, but they're interdependent. You can say if you have a solid foundation that's consistent, you then have the confidence to then explore and experiment and grow in many directions. And both are necessary in life. You need the consistency, but a foundation alone is not where we live. We don't live in a foundation of a building. We live on the floors above. We live in places that are far more diverse. So you need a solid foundation, and then upon that foundation, you can really build and explore and experience what we call, the adventure of life. The enthusiasm, the free abandon. People who are very consistent say, why don't you have some imagination? Let's do something different. Let's not always do it the same way. Some people just want to do it the same way. So the suggestion here is that you don't need to choose one or the other. That in truth, you can master both. Now, many people who are very much of the moon type, and not necessarily because they're so adventurous. It could also be fear. They can't lay their hat to rest too long anywhere. That's why they don't commit to anything. Not because they're so courageous. It's because they're so afraid to stay in one place too long. And not everybody's consistent is because they're consistent. Maybe they're afraid to explore. So the truth is, you need both. And if you have an element of confidence, and there's an element of a strong base foundation, then changes should be very welcome. Not only welcome, should be necessary, because we human beings change. We're always in need of new fresh air, new ideas, new stimulation. So the reconciliation of the sun and the moon, therefore, is not just some type of mathematical or astronomical thing that's Passover should be both consistent in the lunar calendar, solar calendar. It's actually a lesson in life. So which brings me to the topic at hand, love. What is healthy love? What is unhealthy love? So, the word love, everybody knows what that word means. I'm not saying it's necessarily the correct meaning that you have, but everyone knows the word because it's something from the youngest of age, from the newborn, probably even before that. The love that a parent will show a child, or should show a child, is something that's like a given. It's as important as oxygen, as food. That love, the nurturing that comes with love, the care, the everything that you, all the synonyms that you want to apply to it. So we all know with that we all know the need for it, and the need both to take, to receive, and to give love. What's far more complicated is what it means. What does the word mean? And it remains a mystery, or else you wouldn't have so many books and poems and songs written about it if it was just figured out. It's not figured out yet. And may never be, I suggest. And maybe it's healthy, it shouldn't be figured out. But that doesn't mean we can't understand some of it, and also we could also figure out what is healthy love, what is unhealthy love. So I'm sure I can depict certain scenarios where everybody would agree here. We could have a consensus that's definitely unhealthy. And I'm sure certain things that everyone would agree was healthy. The problem is not those extremes. The problem is the big in between, which you're not really sure. Is this healthy, not healthy? Just to use very broad stroke examples. So you have a couple, let's say, and one person is very needy. Another person has no problem giving. Question is this healthy? If one person is giving a lot more than the other person, even if they both mutually they agree, this person likes to give, this one likes to take, and it works. Where is the line crossed? When does it become not healthy? Is it because it works for them? Does that make it healthy? Just one classic example. And will it ultimately backfire? If someone's giving and never receiving, as noble as they may be, at some point will there be resentment? And to what extent? So we all understand there has to be a give and take. The question is, what's the measure? And another factor is also why one person is needy and why the other one is not. Is it coming for healthy reasons or not healthy reasons? Unfortunately, God forbid, in relationships, sometimes a person is in a situation where they need that help. And the other person will definitely give it. Not because they're not going to start calculating, well, how much did you give me the last 20 years before I start giving you? Because that's what love is about. Healthy love. As we'll soon discuss, that's not everyone's attitude. The classic story they tell about, unfortunately, a woman who's suffering Alzheimer's, and her husband would come visit her every day at the home where she was, and she was deteriorating to the point where she didn't recognize anyone. She stopped recognizing him, at least consciously. We don't know what's going on deeper down. We all, I'm sure, no one should know of these types of situations. Very tragic and horrible to see. So the nurse tells him, Mr. So-and-so, whatever, he says, what's the point of your coming? She doesn't recognize you anymore. Meaning, she absolutely won't recognize you. She says, yeah, but I recognize her. Here's what his response was. Which tells you everything. So, in discussing this, what I'd like to do is define a bit some of the parameters. And of course, most important is, the biggest question is, where am I getting it from? If we're all subjective when it comes to love, because everybody's got their share of experiences, for good or for bad, how much of that is impacting us? If you grew up in a home where your parents didn't love in a healthy way, obviously that becomes your standard, and you may think that's healthy. Or at least you'll know maybe that's not healthy, but I don't know what is healthy. This is a major factor. Where do we learn about love? We don't just read it in a book and then we apply it. We learn from the people around us. At the youngest age, that's what we learn, what was given to us, what wasn't given to us, how it was given to us, how our parents dealt with each other. If you grew up in a home where there was a divorce, or whether it was physical divorce or emotional divorce, or in some way relationship was not balanced or something was wrong, it's going to impact a person forever. And to ways we don't even know. So it's not so simple to just step back and say, okay, what's an objective view on love? None of us are objective about it. Even if you grew up in a very beautiful home and there's a very healthy love, you're also subjective. That shaped you. And then there's many variations of it. So it's a complicated subject to talk about because we don't have a so-called objective arbiter and say this is it. Or do we? As we'll discuss in a moment. So I just want to qualify whatever I'm going to be saying, where I'm taking it from. Obviously, anyone speaks, including myself, there's partially your own experience, your own logic, your own common sense, things I've observed, not just in myself, but in others. And there's, of course, many variations. I haven't met 7 billion people on this planet, and I'm sure everyone has their own version of how they love. But I think when you see a cross-section of a society, you can get a picture. If you only met one person, obviously, no way you can make any type of conclusions or even suggestions. Well, you meet many different types of people, both in the healthy spectrum, the unhealthy spectrum, and all the in-betweens and over. It helps one understand. But the main thing I want to share is a lot of what I'm going to be saying is coming from texts of Torah texts. Both biblical texts, Talmudic texts, and above all mystical texts, which talk about the subject in a far more detached way. Meaning that it talks about where's the root of love? Where is the psychological root? Why is there such a thing called love anyway? Where did it come from? So I think that's a great way to begin, because if you address that, you can then address many other layers as they manifest. So if you study let's call the different psychological models out there are many, but there's one most common one in the Western world, very different in the Eastern world, very different. It's almost like opposites. But in the Western world that we know, United States, Europe, Western countries, the version of love is very much today actually full of contradictions, because it's a mix between Christian ideals, which in itself is a mix of Jewish and pagan and many other things that picked up. But the population is the largest population in the West. There are many things there, many distortions as well. And a combination of what we would call in the last few hundred years in the Enlightenment and psychological models. Some that contradict the religious models, some that try to reconcile. Bottom line, it's a mess. So just I don't know if it's a consolation. So if you think your love is in a mess, everyone has the same type of mess. And it begins even on an academic level. Nobody has it figured out. But there are theories. I'm just using some theories because it's a good, for the contrast purposes, to discuss. So I coined this theory, this model, which is probably the most prevalent in general terms in the Western world. I'm talking about the scientific Western world. The Freudian Darwinian model, we'll call it. Even though Freud and Darwin never met. But there's certain similarities, and they have shaped a lot of how the Western world thinks about it. As I said, with plenty of conflicts, because there's also preceding both of them is the Christian view or the general religious view that still impacts life today, whether you know it or not. Now, these are deeply embedded because we are shaped by our ancestors and they're shaped by their ancestors, so there's all kinds of attitudes. Now, of course, speaking as a Jew, there's also the Jewish perspective, which I'm going to lead to, the Torah perspective. But I have to distinguish, there are Jewish perspectives today also influenced by these other factors. And then there's what you go to the original Bible in Genesis and original Kabbalistic writings, and there you have that's not necessarily the same picture as the social one that we're familiar with. So that's some of the sources. I'll quote them as we go. So what is the general gist of it? And I qualify this again. I don't want to sound oversimplifying because there's very many complex variations of what I'm going to say now. But there's definitely consensus about certain key elements. And that is based on the principle, let's call it Richard Dawkins has a book called The Selfish Gene. So he's a radical biologist, a radical atheist, and a radical, let's call it the narcissistic view of nature. Now, if you're familiar, the philosophical roots of that go back to a philosopher called Schopenhauer. And the theory works like this. I'm quoting literally from Schopenhauer and some of Richard Dawkins and some other who take the approach this way. The cardinal rule of existence is survival of the species, perpetuation of the species. Now, frankly, this is an axiom that no one really can prove why it's this way, but that's what the assumption is in science today. That the species will do anything to survive, which itself is interesting, which basically means selfishness. It needs to survive. Hence the expression, survival of the fittest. It's the basis of natural selection, survival of the fittest, because every species will do whatever it takes to survive. It will compete for resources and will eliminate enemies in order for it to perpetuate itself. And hence the selfish gene. It's not by choice, according to this theory. It's the way nature is programmed. Everything will do anything for it to survive. Now, if it includes coexistence with another entity because it helps my survival, then selfishness dictates also altruism. But it's all ultimately rooted in something that is for me. So how do they apply this to love? Love seems to be not just for me. Love means loving someone else. Say, well, the species needs love. In order for it to get love, it has to give love. So love is yet another need. The need of being nurtured, the need of being taken care of. If you don't have, for example, if mothers would not take care of their young, the species won't survive. So whether it's crocodiles, or it's frogs, or it's bumblebees, they'll take care of their young because that's necessary for the survival of the species. Because the older generation won't last forever. The young can be consumed by other predators or by natural forces. So it's part of the love that a parent, in this case, will show to a child, is in order to perpetuate itself. This is, and I'm saying here, it may sound, if I take it to the first extreme, it can sound extremely selfish. But I'm not trying to exaggerate it. But there's a little exaggeration can help drive the point home. Now, with this approach, obviously, love takes on a very, very narcissistic perspective. It has nothing to do with love as we understand it in the romantic sense of it. I've even seen some evolutionary theorists write that only human beings became a mutation in the context of love. If you look at all species, they breed without any complexities. They don't need therapy. They don't need a lot of preparation, even though there is preening and showing off. But it's all about, as they say, to see which male has the best genes, which female will be most nurturing. It's human beings, and this I've actually read, they say that some quirk in evolution, which became a major waste of money and resources, that men and women have to court each other with all its complexities. I've even read that basically almost all of everything in existence, from museums, obviously to bars, and flowers, and everything, all these industries are all about the courtship to breed. But if nature, all it is about perpetuating the species, why do we need such a long, romantic courtship? So people have written, it's a mistake of nature, because it's a real waste of resources. Human beings, had they evolved properly, they should just do it exactly the way other creatures do it. You mate, move on, no discussions, you don't need to seduce anything. You move on, finish business, and go on. I know it sounds a little repulsive to us because we like the romantic perspective, but you read Schopenhauer, you tell me. He completely de-romanticizes. He says it's just basic, simple. The species must perpetuate. Everything else is meaningless. So why do these humans have to go through all these complexities? Because their minds have evolved, and like I say, it doesn't pass. It's like it's not etiquette. But animals don't have this issue because they cut to the chase. Nature says this is what they need to do, and that's what they need to do, and you move on just like anything else. So when the praying mantis, or what they call the black widow spider, why are they called black widow? You know why it's called black widow. It's a very efficient type of business. They make love, what we would call, right? And instead of having to go, and then after the black widow spider or the praying mantis, the same thing, receive the seed, they begin to eat their partner. And by the time it's over, the partner has already been finished a meal, and then they go to sleep. That you see this. So you have everything all in one shot. A very efficient type of nature. I know some men may feel that way. Maybe some women feel that way as well. But in nature, there are such creatures. Now, thank God it's not all species. The black widow spider, that's why it's called the black widow. Widow. She becomes a widow right there and then. And if you wonder, she'll say, where's she going to get the next seed from? There's always another candidate, another sucker, another male spider. But they all cooperate, and the males know it. I guess it's worth it, or whatever it is. But the bottom line is, this is one way nature does it. So we won't go to that extreme, that humans should be that way. But at least more efficient. And you don't need the whole so-called foreplay that exists. I mean that in a far more broader sense than the literal sense of all that goes on. And everybody knows the complexities. There'd be no J date. There'd be no this date, that date. You'd have an efficient system. What do you think, Gary, about that? To be considered. We'll discuss at the next board meeting.
Take the fun out.
Okay. Take the chase, right? The fun of the chase, right? But the point I want to make is that love, from this perspective, is really just essentially, this is Schopenhauer's word, an excuse for the species to get together. Because if you didn't have any feeling of love, why would you get together? Just to have children? So basically, nature plays a trick on us to get two people together, so they have the thing that they think they love each other. That's a way to get them together. They breed, and the job has been done. Species is perpetuated. Which is why, when the pill came out in 1965, there were some theories that said what you're doing is you're destroying this element. Because now the whole point of love was in order to be able to bear the species should perpetuate, and now you're eliminating that. That's another discussion. Now I know this may sound a little ridiculous or funny even, but I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. You can do research, go to Google, and look up Schopenhauer, look up the theory. And if you look around, tell me if it doesn't resonate. This drives, essentially, what love is. So love in this context, there's nothing wrong. So what? So it's selfish. It's not selfish completely, because I do care and I do give. But the bottom line is, what's the driving force is because we need to perpetuate the species. And nature will do whatever it takes to do so. The fact that we've attributed so much romantic elements and so much sort of nobility, and people will die for the person they love and so on, as I said, according to some theories, that's a mutation. It shouldn't have happened. There is such theories, because based on this theory, why would you have that? Why would you need people to die for each other? Why is that need? Why do humans take it that seriously? It's about, as I said, it's about perpetuating the species. Now, in contrast to that, what's the Torah view? You'll be surprised how the Torah view is so far a complete opposite extreme. Even though most people would think it's the opposite way. You open up a Bible, and without any commentary, this is what it says. It says, God said, I will create a human being in my image. A human being. He created male and female. The first time the human being is mentioned in the Bible. And then in a period of around 7-8 verses, only 7-8 verses, you'll have the whole story that of hundreds of thousands of books and poems and songs that have been written. The Bible just needed 7 sentences. And even less probably. It continues that God then separated the male and female. Basically, it was an androgynous creature, if you read it literally. He separated male and female. And because of that, they both look to reconnect, because they really want. They both look to reconnect with each other, and they will leave their home of their parents, they'll leave their comforts to find each other, and in that process to reconnect to the image of God in which they were once created, and only as a whole. Then comes a second dimension, a second thing that God says: when you come together, you have a mitzvah, pru'uruvu, you should multiply and have children. So contrary to misconception, many people think Judaism teaches it's all about marriage, it's only about procreation, having children. It's not true at all. Based on this, it's the exact opposite. Children is a product of love, but not the reason for love. The reason for love is a very divine, you could say mystical, and very romantic version. It's two people, two souls, what we call the soulmate idea. That's where the soulmate idea comes from. A soulmate is very different than what I described from the Freudian Darwinian model. A soulmate means that two real people looking to be more complete. So it's not what I'm going to get from the other person, it's actually what I'm going to give to the other person, because in other words, love equals transcendence in this model. In the first model, love equals a need. It's a need. It's a sublime need. But it's a need. It's a need. It's necessary to get two people together to breed. Here, it has an end in itself. The mere fact that there's sexual attraction, male to female, in its purest form, before it's been distorted by anything, is the most divine possible thing. It's two halves of one divine entity looking to find each other. Now, I'm not here to prove one theory or other. You tell me which is more romantic, which is more resonates more, which is more appealing. That's the Torah view on the matter. So you can imagine the consequences of these two views are very, very different. If you go with the first approach, when there's a couple having an issue in love, and they're having difficulty with love, what's the resolution? The resolution is they're both selfish. There's another purpose involved. There's no transcendence here. So maybe you don't have to work it out. In the Torah view, the whole point is transcendence. The whole point is two people who are looking for each other. So as I said, the implications of that are very different. The implications are that you are looking to go, not become greater, not take more, but you're looking to become more. So the other person is there to help you become greater than you could have ever been on your own. It's a whole different significance than coming together and perpetuating myself, which really defines itself in ultimately a selfish act. Yeah, for a good reason. That's perpetuation of the species. Basically, the two models, one would dictate much more taking in a relationship, the other one dictates much more giving in a relationship. Why am I beginning with this? Because this is a key thing in understanding what is healthy, what is unhealthy love. We have to first define what love is. If you take the Schopenhauer, the Darwinian model, the Darwinian model, if love is about perpetuation of the species, if love is about me getting my needs met, etc., so there's a whole different amount of expectations. What are the expectations? Why shouldn't there be so-called battle of the sexes and let's see who wins? If, on the other hand, it's two halves of one whole, then if one loses, the other one it's win-win. If one loses, the other one loses. It's a very different attitude of how you would approach it. Now, it's important to step back and address it this way before we apply it to our own personal lives, because as I said earlier, if you begin with your own personal life, you're going to have all the distortions that you already have assumed and your own experiences. That's why it's important to step back and say, what is it really like if, for example, a newborn child, without any preconceived notions, without any corruption or pollution of our experiences. Many people, for example, their attitude to love is very much affected by their relationships in the past. People who've been hurt, whose trust has been abused, been betrayed in some way or other, are very fearful and very, very concerned to enter into a relationship. They don't want to be hurt again. On the other hand, as I said, you can't live with it, you can't live without it. So what happens is it becomes a whole bunch of part of the politics, the bedroom politics, of figuring out how do I find love without being hurt too much. This is a new art that people are trying to master. What I'm suggesting is, from a Torah point of view, the key is to go back to the source, to figure out what is the so-called prototype or archetype of what healthy love is about. And then bring your life in and see how far am I from that model. So we're here now in the month of Elul. Month of Elul, which just began yesterday. So you're familiar, I assume, with my book 60 Days, right? So here's a plug for 60 Days. We began, and if you're interested, we're sending out a daily email. If you're interested, please leave us your email. I'll be happy to send it to you. So this book I created is a book that's composed by taking these months of Elul that we're in now and going into Tishrei, the high holiday season. And my real objective was to make it really relevant, or to reveal the relevance. The high holidays, almost everybody has they want to go to synagogue, they want to start anew, but so much disappointment because you go to synagogues or you try and you don't really get what you're looking for. You don't find necessarily a resonating message, and then you hear the rabbi tell you that the sermon that you only show up on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and that's what you come to hear every year. So I tried to not really do anything new, but really dig deeper into the Torah sources and demonstrate the profound relevance in this period of time. And when you look into it, it's unbelievable. As I said before, you don't need to go very far. All the books written, all the programs, therapeutic programs, are right there, thousands of years old, in the process of Elul and Tishrei. It's a story of love, betrayal, and reconciliation. In 3 words. The whole story. What is the story? The story goes, historically, the Jews leave Egypt 3,325 years ago. It's documented in the Bible. 50 days later, they received the Torah at Sinai. 40 days later, Moses comes down from the mountain and the Jews have built a golden calf, betraying the relationship with God. Sinai is compared to a wedding. Yom Chasanos is Matan Torah. Moses goes back, he shatters the tablets, goes back to pray for forgiveness. And he's not successful. He comes back down, and then goes back a 3rd time, Rosh Chodesh Elul, today. Some opinions it was yesterday. And we'll spend another 40 days, and what are 40 days from today? Is Yom Kippur. Kippur is exactly 40 days from 30 days of Elul and 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. So it goes 50 days from Passover to Shavuos, to Matan Torah, 40. So basically, Yom Kippur is 170 days from Passover. And just like I said before about the moon and the sun, it's all a very precise map and blueprint for life. It's not just nice dates. Everything is calculated here. Even the numbers, 40. As I said, I'm not going to go through all the details, but just the basic highlights. In the book, it's discussed a little more in the introduction, the whole structure. What's the story? Leaving Egypt is the story of transcendence. Growing up, getting freed from your constraints. That's what Mitzrayim means. And we all have a stage in our lives where we reach that type of maturity. And then it leads you to even a greater point where you receive a mandate of wisdom. You can call that the Torah. You reach a state of appreciation or a mandate of understanding your mission in life. But life is complicated, and then comes the descent, comes the fall, the betrayal. Things are growing great, there's love, and then something happens, and there's a betrayal. And here's where it gets, I would say the word exciting, but here's the challenge. What happens after there's a betrayal? What happens after someone has broken a promise? A dream has been shattered. A commitment has been lost. Is there hope? Is there hope after such a break? And this is the great challenge. That's what Moses was doing on the mountain for 80 days. It took 40 days to receive the law, the Torah. It took 80 days to receive forgiveness. And he's demanding from God to forgive the people and saying, I need to tell them that there's hope. We're human beings. We all make mistakes. So I'm not justifying mistakes, but don't tell me it's hopeless. There's damaged goods, there's irreversible. And he finally prevails, which is why Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Because Moses prevailed over God, that God said, yes, I'll give you the opening. That if they make the effort, they know they can repair something that's broken. Is the essence of all healing, all therapy. You come to a therapist, I have a problem in my life. And then you start reviewing, and it's a serious problem. Something at my childhood. I won't even mention worse things, violations, molestations, all kinds of abuse. So you can take the attitude, okay, too bad. Damaged goods, my friend. We'll figure out to do some damage control, we'll minimize, but no way to do anything about it. That message is not the Torah's message. That's a fatalistic message. The Torah says there's hope, there's no such thing as impossible. Everything can be resolved. It doesn't mean you can turn the clock back as if nothing happened. But you can grow from it and actually become better than it was before. That's the concept of tshuva. Tshuva means to return, interestingly. Tshuva does not mean to repent. Repent means you leave something behind. Tshuva means to return. Some emphasize the word atone, the Day of Atonement. Atone means at one. Atone is 2 words, at one. It's returning to what? It's returning to the essence of who you really are before the damage took place. But to get there, you need to do more work. Think of the healing process. What's the healing process in a human being? Hopefully everybody's healthy forever. But let's say some infection invades the body, a virus, infection, the body goes to war, it battles, gets rid of the infection. What happens after that? Your immune system has become stronger. That particular strain of the virus cannot affect you any longer, in most cases. Now, no one wants that, but what does the body have to do? It has to dig deeper and access a deeper immunity. Now, obviously, to use the analogy just to be thorough, the analogy doesn't work all the way, because there are things in healing that, God forbid, something happens, sometimes you can't reverse it. But that's not how it is in the spiritual or psychic wounds. And that's what Moses achieved, that everything can be addressed. That's why Yom Kippur is such a powerful day. Think of it that way. Yom Kippur is your ability to revisit your wounds and your scars and things that you've been hurt by, and figure out how you can transcend it, figure out how you can dig deeper. And you can access deeper immunity, deeper powers. That's what it's about. We'll talk about it more when we get closer to that. I don't want to talk about Yom Kippur so much. What's the beginning of the process? Elul. And what's Elul? The word itself is an acronym, as you may know. The Hebrew alphabet is full of meanings, layers and layers of meanings. Elul is an acronym. Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. 4 letters. Aleph, Vav, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. In Hebrew, Ani L'Daidi, it's a verse in the Song of Songs. Again, in 60 days is elaboration on this acronym and other acronyms, which I'm not going to address now. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. From the Song of Songs of Solomon. Which means it's a month of love. And that's why, what's the sign of this month? You know the sign. Leo was last month, August. And July, August. The sign of this month is Virgo. Or in Hebrew, Psula. Many great people wanted to get married. Elul was a choice of month for marriage. For that reason. It's a month of love. Sometimes called a month of compassion. Chodesh HaRachamim. Why? Because it's in this month that Moses elicited from God something that he could never elicit unless there was the betrayal. It's called the 13 attributes of divine compassion. Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, that we say in the prayers, and we say increasingly more as we get closer to Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur. In Yom Kippur itself we say it, but at the end of Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah, it's said a whole bunch of times. Because that's what Moses elicited. It's a mystical verses in the book of Exodus and Kisisa, where God says, Hashem, Hashem, Kel Racham Chanun. Again, in the book here I have it more spelled out. But there's entire volumes written just on explaining what are these 13 attributes. God was revealing to Moses, whenever you need something from me, invoke these 13 attributes. And you'll invoke my biggest strength. So obviously mastering this is the secret to a lot. Because it's one thing to ask God, I should never make a mistake, or ask God, I should never be hurt. It's a far greater blessing to say, even if I am hurt, give me the strength to overcome anything. That's a far greater blessing. So if you have a choice, choose number 2. It's also more realistic. To say, you'll have perfection and no one will ever that no one will ever hurt you and you'll never be is not realistic. I'm not justifying it, but it's not realistic. Whereas you want to say any challenge that comes in my way, give me the strength. What's a good swimmer? I always mention this. A good swimmer is not someone that avoids every storms. A good swimmer, when a storm comes, he knows not to fight the storm and the tide, and he lets go. He knows how to navigate. That's what you want. You want the blessing to navigate, not the blessing that I should never encounter a storm or never encounter a challenge. That when I do encounter, I should have the strength, the wisdom to know how to navigate through it and grow through it. And then when the storm subsides, then I use my force to thrust forward and so on. So Elul is essentially a preparatory month to the high holidays, including Yom Kippur, because that's the month that Moses spent on the mountain talking to God. It'd be fascinating to have been a fly on the wall, though there was no wall and no flies there, but to be able to understand this dialogue. A little we have documented in the chapter Kisisa that I just mentioned, where God speaks to Moses, Moses speaks to God. It's amazing if you study it. It's most intimate and even romantic version of love. But there's Moses and God. And if you want healthy love, look at that discussion. How Moses argues with God. Because it's all about, it's not pleasant. Remember, God is saying, I don't want to forgive them. They betrayed. I told them not to build a false god, and they built a false god, a golden calf. It wasn't a small betrayal. It was equivalent to adultery. And still Moses argues with God and prevails. So if you want to talk about how an argument should be held, you should study that argument. And everybody was happy at the end. The night of Yom Kippur, after Kol Nidre, right after Kol Nidre, we say 3 lines. Most people skip it, don't even realize they're saying it. When God says to Moses, Salachti kidvarecha, I have forgiven them as you've asked me. Imagine. God didn't say, I'm forgiving. As you asked me to do, you prevailed over me. You convinced me. Though initially, it's interesting, we're talking about God here. What does that mean? God changed his mind. What's going on here? But you see the depths of Moses' absolute unconditional love for the people. And he told God, I will not take no for an answer. And I know that you love them even though you keep protesting that you don't. Didn't accept that. And he reached deeper. And you could say God actually wanted him to do that. And it had to come from Moses. Because had God forgiven them, then it's God's gift. It's not forgiveness. Forgiveness means you do something. Moses did something. And it touched God, so to speak. So there's a lot to talk about that as well. But I'm focusing on more of this, healthy love. I am to my beloved to me. Now interesting, when you read the verse, there's another verse in Song of Songs that reverses the order. It says, V'deidi li v'ani loi. My beloved, V'deidi li, my beloved to me, and I to my beloved. So the question is, why is Ani l'deidi, which one is used in Elul? I am to my beloved and my beloved to me. In other words, the initiation comes from you. You're not waiting for your beloved to do the act for. Like someone will say, I have no problem giving unconditional love as long as she loves me unconditionally. Sometimes love means, like the guy with the Alzheimer's, taking a leap. But only healthy people take leaps. Because someone that's insecure or fearful is going to always be waiting and watching. So it takes a lot of strength because you're taking a risk. And love is a risk. We talked about a few weeks ago about, that was last week, when was it? Vulnerability. Who wants to be vulnerable? The word vulnerable elicits all kinds of negative. Most people, vulnerable means, like let's say in corporate discussions, we're vulnerable means we're vulnerable to attack. We're vulnerable to a lawsuit. Vulnerable is considered a very negative term in most people's minds. From a Torah point of view, vulnerable is the greatest level you can reach. That you could have someone you can be vulnerable with. That means there's total trust. And you don't have to be driven by fear. But we live in a dangerous world, we feel. And it's not surprise, because if we take the attitude of the selfish gene, well, no surprise. We live in a world of dog eats dog. I don't know who wants something from me. So our walls are always up. In a life like that, of course love is going to be a battleground. When in truth, and this is what I'm going to say now, everybody senses, when you hear of fantasy, even novels that don't seem realistic, but when you hear about a love that's completely selfless, it touches everybody. Because you feel that this is the way it should be. You say, I wish I could have that. That's what people will say. I wish that's possible. I remember giving a workshop here in Manhattan, the Learning Annex. It was about relation. It was called, Is There Such a Thing as Love Forever After? So I opened the workshop with that question to around 50 people. Men and women, secular, all different backgrounds. I said, anybody here believes in love forever after? One woman raised her hand. One out of 50 people. A young woman, I should add. I mean, when I say young, very young, relatively speaking. Maybe 20, 21. Okay, I know you may say that's not young anymore. I mean, the average median age here is what? 24, 25? So 21 is young. Okay. Gary, you look as young as when I first met you, so. Good. You must be doing something right. Okay. And I asked the people, so why? I was a little surprised, not because I knew that most people don't believe it, but I didn't think they'd acknowledge it. Most people don't like to acknowledge that. They'll say, yeah, of course I believe. Because I remember, I was thinking, I said, there must be some couples here. What do they think about each other when someone says, I don't believe in love forever after? So I asked why, and everyone had interesting insights. And one person said something which I elaborated upon, which is basically this. Everything in life dies. Everything erodes. Everything decays. Everything ages. So why suddenly love is forever after? Why it's suddenly eternal love? I know it's a nice concept, but is there something in the world that's in the life that's eternal? So what is this fantasy? And someone said, you know why this woman says that? Because she didn't have any disappointments yet. Let's come to her in 5 years. Let's see if she still believes in love forever after. So it was quite sad, even though it was funny. It was sad to hear. And I elaborated exactly on the point I made earlier here, and I'll just tell you briefly what it was. I said, I understand fully where you're coming from. You're right. Scientifically, everything decays, everything ages. So why would you believe in love forever after? Yet in Judaism, there's a statement called binyan adeyad, an eternal edifice. Adeyad means not just eternal, a double eternal. Forever and ever. So the answer is, depends what your perspective is. What love is. If love is another human institution, then it's subject to whatever any human institution. Empires fall, money is lost, food runs out, everything runs out. And love is part of that. But if love is a divine institution, and if it has an element of divinity in it, then the divine infuses it with eternity. So that sounds a little esoteric. Let's spell it out even more. There's the three usual suspects, or the three main criteria for what people would call compatibility. We call physical compatibility, right? People are attracted to each other. Physically, sexually, however you define physical attraction. Then you have emotional compatibility. You could be physically attracted to someone, but there's no emotional connection altogether. You could fall in love with a model, a picture, something on the screen. But you meet that person, you may not have anything in common. So then there's intellectual compatibility. It's not just emotional, intellectual. Respect, share ideas, stimulate each other. Now, if I asked the group, I said, so anything else to add to this list? So someone says, if I have 1 out of the 3, I'd be happy. 2 out of the 3 is like, heaven, and 3 out of the 3 is, I don't think is even possible. Okay. So I said, which one of the 3 would you like? The physical, the emotional, or the intellectual? Now, I'm not dismissing any of those 3. I think they're all necessary. Even the most spiritual person, we live in a physical world. You need to be attracted to the person that you want to love. You definitely don't want to be repulsed by them, even if they have inner beauty. On the other hand, every one of us understands that it's not just outer beauty. You want to also have inner beauty. You can have someone that's really beautiful on the outside, an ugly personality, a person with no midas tevus, is not kind, compassionate, trusting, can be far worse than a person who on the outside is not so beautiful. So you want the best of all worlds. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But there are 3 different compatibilities. But there's a 4th compatibility that is very often usually not mentioned at all. That's what I'm saying. Rack your brain. What else can there be, right? The 4th, we'll call it spiritual compatibility. And let me define what that means. Simple English. It means you share a vision together. You share what kind of home you want to build, what kind of children. When people come in your environment, what feelings do you want to be elicited? What mark are you making in this world? What's the difference between the 4th and the other 3? The other 3 are all needs. I need to be attracted to that person, and that person to me. There's emotional needs, and there's intellectual needs. The 4th one is the one that can survive anything. Because the first 3 would change. People age, and what the logic, listen, my spouse is now 20 years old. She or he is not as beautiful as they once were. I found someone more beautiful. I know many of us don't think that's appropriate, but you can understand the logic if you live in that life, and that's what's important. Same thing emotionally. How much can you be stimulated emotionally? I'm connected, but then I've outgrown my spouse, my partner. And the same thing intellectually. You meet someone in the office, somewhere else, they intellectually stimulated. They're different, a different perspective. I'm not getting now into what is ethical and what is not. I'm not discussing. I'm talking simply the argument, so to speak, about it. However, spiritual compatibility, which you find people have, you can be with the same spouse for 40, 50, 60 years. The vision doesn't change. And you grow together. Not to mention that you age together too. So whatever's happening to one is happening to the other. But if you take love as a selfish need, obviously the logic is that it's going to be subject to the conditions that you apply to it. And if the conditions are no longer there, the love disappears. It's called ava tluya b'davar, conditional love. I won't compare it to a business contract where, if the other party doesn't live up to the contract, I'm out. Some people actually see it that way too. They won't call it a business contract, but they say, listen, it's a love based on certain circumstances. Those circumstances are gone. I no longer have a need for the other person. A person who has a vision in life, and that's shared by their spouse. Let's go back. Soulmates, 2 souls of 2 halves of one soul, that recognizes that the purpose of existence is not to get your needs met, but to serve a higher cause. And you were sent here on a mission. And you have an indispensable contribution to make to this world. You have indispensable music to play. And this is the person that's playing with you the music. And that's how you look at life. That has eternity in it. Not only eternity, that lives on even when people die. And their children and grandchildren. People wondered about the eternity of the Jewish people. What do you think is the eternity of the Jewish people? It comes down to one simple thing. That the ancestors who committed to something didn't commit to themselves that died with them. They committed to values that don't die. Is the plug plugged in all the way? Squeeze it in sometimes strong. Abraham was a great philosopher, a great thinker, pioneer, unbelievable spiritual person. He could have decided, you know what? I'm too important to diaper children and to be busy with with the mundane matters of running a home. And if you think that's uncommon, think again. All great thinkers all did that choice exactly. Read the story about Rousseau in France. We're Aristotle's children and grandchildren. Some consider him the greatest philosopher. How come he didn't build a family that perpetuated his values? I'm not judging him. But what was Abraham's greatest achievement? That he transcended his own brilliance and didn't just think himself on my great contribution. Because big philosophers and thinkers, I'm too important for the menial stuff. When God says the greatest compliment to Abraham, you know what he says? Abraham, I will not conceal my plans from Abraham. You know why? Because he committed his life. He committed his life and his family's life to build a family that will perpetuate tzedakah mishpat. They will perpetuate tzedakah mishpat, kindness and justice. That was the biggest thing. Far easier for a person of such brilliance to just live his own life, write books. Whether he wants glory or not, I won't even get into that. But to be involved with the daily upbringing of children. You know, such people say, bring me my children when they're adults and I can talk to them. I want to deal with them when they're just a pain and stuff like that. Don't underestimate the power of such bittul. This is what Jewish parents did for thousands of years. That's why this nation is here. What do you think? It's nothing to do with money. The Roman Empire is not here because they didn't have that commitment. They had commitment to themselves, to their glory, and then then you run out of money and you run out of resources, and then there's another army that's stronger than yours, and then your own arrogance also destroys you. You can't destroy the humble. You can only destroy arrogance, because arrogance is loud and strong, and it's all about me. At some point, every me comes to an end. But if it's not about you, so what's going to come to an end? Your selflessness? Selflessness doesn't end. Only the self ends. This material world is subject to time and space because material life decays, as I said, ages. You know what can age? Spirit does not age. Values don't age. Now this isn't just a nice concept. There are people who, with their spouses, lived lives and they loved each other the last day, 80 years later, just like day one. Maybe even more, I would say. And this brings me to the key distinction between a healthy love and unhealthy love. You know, we have the concept of love at first sight. Usually films today are approximately 2-3 hours. So the whole love story has to happen in 2-3 hours. No one's hanging around longer. So it creates a very distorted and I would say almost bizarre, unrealistic view. You know, love at first sight. I fell in love. There was this woman that came to the Rabbi many years ago. She was a single, very eligible and very accomplished woman. She was having difficulty finding a mate. The Rebbe suggested her this person, that person. No, this one was too tall, this one was too short, this one was too stupid, this one didn't have emotions, you know, this. You get the idea. So the Rebbe stopped and told her something, which I asked her because I wrote the story up in Torah Meaningfulife. To me, it was so fundamental line that the Rebbe said to her. He said to her, you know, you read too many novels. And love is not what you read in the books. Love is not this thing that you just fall in love with somebody. That's what he said. Listen to this. He says, love is what happens when two people commit to each other and they do the small little details that are not dramatic in life. And at some point they become inseparable. So let me elaborate a bit on what that means. We know in life, anything that's real has to go through a process and emerges. You can't buy something that's real. You can buy false things. You can buy artificial things. The concept of process and emergence, especially in our fast food age, is something a foreign concept to us. Let me explain what that means. You plant a seed in the ground. There's nothing you can do but wait until it's ready to sprout. You have to water it, you have to take care of it, but it's a process. That takes time. A child is conceived. You can't do anything. It has to go through the 9 months, or whatever the period of time, for their development. There's nothing you can do about that. There's no technology that can speed it up. You don't want a technology to speed it up, frankly. And I mentioned the other day about the butterfly struggling to get out of the cocoon. from being a caterpillar. So a guy was compassionate, unhealthy compassion, as you'll see in a moment. He decides, why should the butterfly have to struggle? He takes a pair of scissors, cuts it open, butterfly is free. He had Rahmanis. He felt sad for the butterfly that was struggling to get out. And he's waiting for this beautiful butterfly, this majestic butterfly, to start to flutter, to fly. Not going anywhere. Till he realized he didn't do the butterfly any service. On the contrary, the pressure that when the butterfly is struggling to get out, the pressure forces liquid into its wings that give it the proper balance, the aerodynamic that it needs to fly. And by relieving it of that pressure, the butterfly didn't struggle as much, but the butterfly is grounded now forever. So a process is critical. We don't live in an agrarian society today, so we're not in touch with seasons. But yes, you can get cherries 24/7 anytime. Press a button, it's at your door. No, there's blessings to technology, but sometimes you lose touch with nature, with the cycles of nature. There's a beauty to the cycles of nature. Why am I saying this? So we apply love, which is such a basic primal element in life. We also try a high-tech version of love, which is, hey, I want to find somebody, I want fireworks. I feel love somebody. Maybe let's review that. Maybe this may sound a little radical. I don't feel it's radical, but I'll say it. Maybe we don't love until it takes many years later you really love somebody. Maybe it begins with something called liking. Two people like each other. They find compatibility. Let's use other words. Physical, emotional, intellectual. They share something greater. They commit to each other. And they start doing life together. And not just the dramatic, nice things. Not just there for the party. After the honeymoon. The details. Little things. When nobody's around, there's no pictures, no awards, no glitter. And maybe that's like a seed in the ground. And if you water it, you take care of it. You cut out the weeds. And you keep caring like a good gardener. What happens? After a while, it grows into a tree. And that tree is called love. Not such a bad theory. I'm not suggesting that you can do that with everyone. You want to call love the early stages of it? But maybe that's a better way of looking at it in a much more mature way. That's what happens. It's a product. It's not the cause, it's a product. Now obviously you need to have certain compatibilities. You need to have something that you're ready to do that with someone. The reason I'm saying it is not just semantics, it's to bring out a very critical point. You want eternity, you have to do something to get eternity. You're not getting a gift out of nowhere. If you don't introduce eternity into your relationship, how can it ever be eternal? So obviously, that's why all those 49 people were right. Yeah, how can I believe in love forever after? Yeah, because they were ready to invest. It's not forever after. So obviously you're not going to get that as a result. You don't get something that you haven't put in there. You bring in some eternity into your life, something that has eternal value, then you have great potential for that. But there's a price. The price is that it's not just about your comforts and not just about your needs. There's something you have to give for that. I always counsel couples who get ready to get married or before their marriage. I always say to them, besides all the other practical things, is do something, but now, not wait later. Because when you do it in the beginning, at the outset, you start out a certain way, then you keep to it. Commit to something, like let's say every Thursday for an hour, at evening, we'll study something together. We'll read something together. I'm not talking about the regular things that you're not obligated to do. Not just go out to dinner or something like that. Study something together. Bring something spiritual into your life. Once a month maybe, host in your house some type of get together. Bring friends, whatever it is. Something that's not just about you two. Something greater than the two of you. A number of people take me up on this suggestion, but I can tell you one particular story. This literally couple told me years later. I didn't know about it till they told me. He said this suggestion saved their marriage. Because what happened was they did it. And then, things happen. People get into conflicts. Things happen. But because they committed to that, they weren't talking all week long. They were upset at each other, whatever the reasons were. Justified, not justified. But this they stuck to. They said it was the old glue that when everything else fell apart, this they stuck to, and this is what we built on. Because it was not about us. Because everything else, the arguments were all about our interests. My interest conflicts with your interests. You're not doing what I want. You don't want, the whole thing. which can become a vicious cycle. He said, this was not because it wasn't me or her, it was not for me or for her, my partner. And that saved us, because it was not about us. Which was exactly the point. That's called introducing something that's not just about my needs. Now, this of course requires case by case to look at this. You can say, well, so what am I supposed to do where I am today? And many of us will say, well, I'm ready to have that attitude, but the guys are not that way. Or the other way around. Everybody blames everybody here, Well, something, yes, you need two to tango, obviously. But if we have to have an attitude that's healthy, that's the start of it. If you go in with an attitude that's not healthy, then you're going to get that as a result. I submit, I have no question in my mind, that most attitudes to love are very unhealthy. Not necessarily overtly unhealthy, like, blatant, abusive. Unhealthy subtly. What the expectations are, what is this really? Above all, it's just one big complex mess. Just for example, ask people the difference between love and intimacy. Love and sex. Most people really, they confuse the two, or they don't even know how to distinguish between the two. Some will say that's the physical part, this is the emotional part. That's what most people will say. Which is basically like I don't want to say, like juvenile response. Is that really what it is? I know it's been relegated to that. For some people, sexuality is technique. Some people, I don't have to love somebody that I sleep with. I'm not going down to a religious and non-religious argument about the topic. I'm just speaking psychologically. It just shows how little we know about these things. Because we need the love, we want the love, but we don't know what else has to. What are we supposed to invest? You tell me it's a garden? Okay, tell me, how do I plant this garden? No one ever trained us. So if we're lucky and we grow up in a healthier, loving home, we at least have the model. We don't have that, then what do you have? Where are you going to get the lesson from? From television? From where? So it's a complicated thing, and I'm not saying in any, God forbid, judgmental way. I think we're all in the same boat. It's a problem. I think the first step is to step back at least and look at it. And not just look, how do I put a Band-Aid and remedy a little thing here. And it's not that easy to do, because we're already in the rat race, we already have our habits and routines, and it's hard to just suddenly say, I'm going to change the whole thing. That's why I don't believe in cold turkey. I think it's about introducing a certain principles. That's why I'm talking about it like giving another perspective on it. I don't know what each of you are hearing, but maybe if something goes into you and that you feel, that's something clicks, that may help. It may help because you take a little different take on it. So when we define healthy love, it's a completely different perspective than love as in what I need. It's about love really as a spiritual force. That's what it comes down to. And I'll add another thing. In Judaism, it's not sexuality, it is intimacy. The Torah calls sex das, knowing. Not to be, not because it's being tzniazdik, modest. It's because that's the real nature of it. Today we've learned to divorce, like I said before, the fast food age. We learned to figure out how to do things and strip it sometimes of its whole soul. Sexuality is the ultimate bonding of two people. Yes, in a physical way, but it comes together with a spiritual bonding and a knowledgeable bonding and a true intimacy. In my book, Torah Meaningful Life, I have a chapter called Intimacy, and I discuss specifically what's the difference between sexuality and intimacy. Sexuality on its own can be, it's like a body without a soul. Of course people can do that. And it could even give pleasure, and you can get away with it, but it's not going to spill over into anything that you're going to be proud of and enhance your life. People who have sex without love, ultimately without healthy love, then it becomes a compartmentalized part of life and is not integrated in the rest of your life. It's a given. It becomes, it's a specific thing. I have a need, I do my need, and then we move on. The perspective of love is much more holistic, which is that love, people really love each other in a way they're having a sexual relationship even when they're not having a sexual relationship. It's far deeper than just an act. Is love a verb or a noun? So some say for men it's a verb and for women it's a noun. The truth is, healthy love is a noun, it's not a verb. A verb is like you go into the water, you get wet. That's a verb, it's an action. Do fish get wet? Let's talk about knowledge. An ignorant person gets knowledge, so now it's a verb. He's learned, he knows something. A person who's a truly knowledgeable person, it's a noun, it's a state of being. You become one with what you know. It's not just I learned something and then I learned something else. It's a very big difference to be To be it and to experience it. To experience is a taste of it. And then you have other things. To be it, you are loved. What that means? 24/7. Those of you who have children probably can relate to this in a very simple way. Do you love your children only when you see them and when you think about them? It's a constant thing. Why do I say children? Because it's safer, children. If I say it about a spouse or anything, it's more complicated. But with children, it's natural. It's not a verb. I love my child. I'm in love with my child all the time. Sometimes I'm aware. Sometimes I'm not aware. Sometimes I'm even doing something that's destructive. But it's a state of being. It's who you are, not just what you do. But when we live in a dysfunctional society, what do you think will happen to love? It'll become a thing you do or a thing you don't do. Because it's too painful. Which is also two extremes. Either I'm all there or I'm completely out of it. The balance is lacking. Now I can go on. I think this type of discussion really requires much more than one class. But I'm talking about some basic principles. And I want to spell out a few more key things. As I said, the model for this is the month of Elul. The model is how Moses speaks to God and how God speaks to Moses. The model is unconditional, and most above all, it does not begin with the love itself. It begins with who you are before you love. Talk about a soulmate. If you're not in connection with your own soul, how exactly do you expect to connect to a soulmate? So if you don't have a spiritual attitude to life, that you're here for a purpose, your soul is on a journey, then obviously you're not going to apply that to relationships. So that begins long before you meet somebody. It begins with who you are and what you're looking for. I know it may sound simplistic, but it really comes down to really one of two options. You're either here to serve yourself, or you were sent here to serve something greater than yourself. Which one is it? Now, I know people don't like stark questions like that, because why can't I have a little of both, You can. I'm not suggesting. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. I'm just here to frame the questions, as they say. As some people say, I'm here, some compliment, or you can say it's an insult, whatever you want. Someone told me, you make miserable people happy and happy people miserable. Okay, so maybe that's good. It's to shake up the system a little. Shock treatment. And I don't mean miserable in a bad way, obviously. We're talking about to not be so comfortable with yourself. So the point is, and everybody, I'm not concerned because you're all adults, consenting adults, and you're all know how to protect yourselves. And I'm sure if something I said that you can't deal with, you'll be able to block it out. What is it Simon and Garfunkel sing, that people only hear what they want to hear anyway? So I'm not concerned. So I don't feel I've assaulted your defenses. I'm sure are intact if necessary. But I will say that there are moments of truth. There are moments that everyone has to sometimes think about yourself in a new way. And nothing wrong hearing, and I speak to myself as well, challenging yourself, because that's how you grow. Especially if you want things to be better, or the things are not good. What do you think you do? Insanity is, they say, you keep doing the same thing expecting different results. And even when we know that, we still do that. So they say in healing, nothing changes. Nothing changes. What I like to think is this: if you think what you thought and you say what you said and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. I know it sounds so, but we don't think like that. We want something different. The question is, what are you doing about it? Nobody likes to maybe put the onus upon themselves. They want to find usual suspects or other culprits or people to blame. But what do you get from that? You feel better that way? If it helps. It's not going to get you a relationship to blame your issues on someone. A relationship means you have to figure out how to have a relationship with someone. So I'm not suggesting everyone can just begin. But a few suggestions I would make is, it's important to have healthy people around you. Let's start with that. Because they're the fresh air. One of the worst things I see, and one of the things that we have control over, more than other things, is who we hang around with. Most of us like to hang around people that are similar. Misery loves company. And if you're dysfunctional, you're around dysfunctional people, you don't look so bad. I know it's a sad thing, but some people feel like, if I hear something that it reminds me that things aren't working so well, we're not comfortable. So you have to do this in your comfort zone, but it's good to have good, healthy friends. People who know how to kick you in the pants when necessarily, and with your invitation, obviously. kind way. People not judgmental. So I want to define a few we'll call healthy signs. What are healthy signs? Since I mentioned judgmentalism, let's start with that. That's a good one. People are judgmental, critical. They're always criticizing others. They always tell them something good, they'll always find something's wrong, you know? What drives people to do that? Is it that they're so discerning and they're so honest? Or is it a little more than that? So, there are many factors. Obviously, a lot is what they see. No question, if your parents have been critical, usually children are critical. What you saw, that's what you do. You don't even realize it. That's what you do. You criticize neighbors, this one, that one, you talk about that one, talk about this. Even when we understand it, it could be extremely petty, and nobody likes to be called petty. So we have all kinds of reasons, but ultimately it is petty. Because why are you busy talking about others? What exactly is gained from that? So, one of the ways to analyze it, and I can't say this across the board, but many situations, has a lot to do with our own insecurities. If you're insecure and fearful and indecisive, it's a very convenient way to feel better if other people are flawed. Because then your flaws are not so much focused on. When you're a very secure person, very secure with yourself, it's a waste. Why would you even need to talk about the flaw of another person? Unless it was relevant to so-called your business. And you have to make a decision, should I go into business with this person? And you make a sober decision, this person is not right for me. Beyond that, why would there be room for gossip, slander? Except it makes you feel a little better because it takes the light off of you. And this is one theory which I happen to subscribe to because I've seen it. It's hard to tell people, you're just an insecure person because they'll always give you reasons. They'll say this person's not good. But I always see this. Every time I see secure people, I always see they talk less about others. It's almost a given. So this can't be a random coincidence. There's a reason for it. And the reason is very obvious. Now, is there such a thing as a purely, completely secure person on this earth? Probably not. Life does not allow for that. But there's measures. There are people who are more secure than they are insecure. And then there are people the other way around. Now, it's one of the hardest things to acknowledge insecurity. Very few insecure people like to say, I'm insecure. That's not exactly comfortable. And that makes you even feel more insecure. But that is a driving force and has a direct impact in love and relationships. How much validation do we need? How much are we really even ready to acknowledge? I've thought about this many times about myself. I know, and I speak very honestly here. Sometimes I think, do I really need that? I can't say I do not need it. Sometimes I wonder, how many things do you do unconsciously that you don't even know you're doing? That's for validation. I'm not even saying it's wrong at the time, but you want to be self-aware. And how much of it is actually undermining what you want to achieve? Now, people are very smart, especially smart people. They know how to cover their tracks. So they can go on a date, and you could think they're the most secure person on earth. And actually, all they are is really looking for validation, looking for someone to love them and say, yes, you're good. But they will never, ever let on. So it's so manipulated. It's so masked in all kinds of machinations and maneuvering that it's just about... And some people like that can make you feel like something's wrong with you. When really, all they are is just one insecure person who just knows how to manipulate well. How much of this affects relationships? That's why I'm saying it's critical to be around healthy people, secure, who are driven to bring light into the world and not driven just to fight. I feel bad when I see people who have this road rage or stupid little things about someone cutting them off in a line and their whole day gets destroyed by that. And one little thing upsets. I feel bad for them because you have no life of your own. So you could be so vulnerable. Somebody just says something and that's it. Your whole day is gone. I feel bad because I think to myself, what is it that they don't have that causes them to be so shaken? Now we all are nobody wants to be insulted, obviously. But the question is, how much are you impacted by other people? And then how much does it impact when you're looking for love in a relationship? How much is that impacting what you're looking for, what the response is, what you feel you're not getting, and your needs are not being met, so to speak, in a relationship? So a few of the so-called symptoms, the signs of health, is this, what I just said. A person that you're around, that when you finish talking to them, you always feel uplifted. then we all know the opposite of that. Feeling drained. Talk to them, every time you talk to them, you feel weaker. You feel less hopeful. A person, you talk to them, they give you hope. They encourage. These are simple, healthy signs. In a context of love, you can imagine what kind of impact that has. A person that you meet, that when you feel stronger around them, you feel that they give you confidence. These are people that are very valuable. Now, obviously, people you sense you can trust. Now, this is a little more complicated because sometimes you feel you can trust somebody, you find out later you can't. So I'm not saying you can just jump into that. But there comes a point, time tells there's certain ways to see where the trust's been tested in different ways. Now, I'm saying these things actually looking at others, but of course to look at yourself is also critical. Can you be trusted? It's a little harder to answer that question. Most of us will say, well, it depends with whom. That's a safe answer because it doesn't mean anything. But the point I'm making is that looking for these healthy elements are critical to finding healthy love. I talked about anila deidi v'deidi, initiating. This doesn't mean that as soon as you meet someone you really want to be with, you say, okay, listen, let's get married, and that's that. Obviously, everything needs to take time. But the question is, why don't you initiate? Is it out of fear of rejection, or fear in general? A person who's secure, or at least believes in something, is going to fight for something. Even if they may not get it, they may be humiliated, they may be vulnerable, as I mentioned. That's exactly what Moses did. I can only imagine what kind of secure man that could have been, standing in front of God and letting everything go, ready to say, erase my name from your book. These are big things, shattering God's tablets, all because he cared so much. Rarely do you find a person like that, but it's good to know there are people like that because it gives you a little model of what people are ready to fight for. And we all know, everyone has the fantasy of the knight in shining armor to save, even though it's a fantasy. Why? Because we like to believe that somebody loves us so much they'll do anything for us. We all would like to find something like that. The question is, were you also ready to give something like that, or only someone do it? Can you be that knight? You know the story where the Baal Shem Tov before Rosh Hashanah, his students who were looking to find the revelation of the prophet Eliyahu was a great achievement. Gili Eliyahu, it's called. See Elijah the prophet. So the Baal Shem Tov said, listen, I'll tell you where you can find this revelation. He tells the student, go to a certain place in a certain town and spend Rosh Hashanah there. He gives him the address, this is the place. He comes, he knocks on the door, he comes in, says, there's something wrong here. I may be at the wrong address. She's a harried housewife, a husband that's completely out of it. The children are running around, a mess. So he asked, is this the address? You've lived here? Yeah, we lived here all our years. Okay, the Baal Shem Tov said, this is the place to be, this is the place to be. He feels bad. He asked them, is there a place I could stay around here? They said, stay. We don't even have food for the holiday. So he decides, you know what? He goes and buys all the food necessary. He asks them, he said, I'll be happy to pay for the food. Give me a little place to sleep somewhere. Okay, they find. And then the holiday goes through, not bad. Revelation of Elijah, he did not find there. Anything, he was just getting through the mess. He comes back home after Rosh Hashanah, goes to the Baal Shem Tov and says, I didn't find no Eliyahu there, Baal Shem Tov says, go back for Yom Kippur. Okay. He respected the Baal Shem Tov, he trusted him. Goes back to Yom Kippur. As he's coming, it's the day before Yom Kippur. The day before Yom Kippur is a busy day. And he comes close to the door, he hears how everybody's yelling, the kids are this. And the wife is telling the husband, we have nothing, we have no food, we have no clothing. So one of the kids says, maybe Eliyahu Navi will come again like he came for Rosh Hashanah. So he realized what the Baal Shem Tov was saying. You're looking for Eliyahu from heaven. Sometimes you are that person. It's you. Sometimes we look for salvation, someone's going to save us. Maybe you just have to rise to the occasion. Do what you want to be done to you. There's a expression called Kol HaMispal Ba'at Chaverei Hu Nena Tchila. It's an interesting statement. It says, anyone who prays for another will be answered first. Which means when you're in need of something and you find someone else in need and you pray for them, you'll be answered before that person is answered. And not as a gimmick. Why? Because when you elicit, you show that type of compassion, it opens up the door of compassion, and then you receive. Is it a trick? It's not a trick. It's the way things work. It's what's called kamayim aponim leponim. Kein lev adam l'adam. The expression in Mishlei, classic. Like a face is reflected in water, so too a heart in another. But again, because we are fearful and when we are hesitant, we don't make the ani l'daidi. We want the v'daidi li first. You come to me first, and then I'll respond. Sometimes that happens, but that's not taking control of your life. And if that happens, did you really make a move, or you're just responding? And when you respond, then you are, what's a responder? A responder is not proactive. You are reacting. Reacting is not from necessarily the healthiest features. Obviously, there are times you have to react. But in life, especially the special things in life, something that's valuable, proactive. But proactive is yet another sign of a healthy element. So sometimes you have to be the knight in shining armor. That part of that you rarely hear the fairy tale told that way. That you end up being. It's always someone else is going to come and do it. And everyone should be blessed to have that. But I really think it's a reciprocal thing, because it doesn't just say ani l'daidi, it also says v'daidi li. There is reciprocal. It's not just a one-way street. The story with the Alzheimer's story is so moving to me. It's extremely moving to hear that story. Not because you want a life like that. Obviously, you want a couple that should recognize each other. But you see what love is. He recognizes her. It's not out of guilt. He's not getting a reward. She won't even know. But this is his life. This is part of who he is. So like what? He's going to ignore himself as part of himself. Now again, many of these concepts, you read novels, you watch movies, everybody's touched by a romantic movie. Even though it may be something we can't relate to, or we could say, I'll never have that. But what's resonating? What's resonating because we know that's what it feels like. It's like a fish in water. You know love when you see it. And when you see it, and you want it. So I'm here to tell you that the Elul and Yom Kippur is a lesson that it's never lost. There's no such thing that you're unable to get it. It doesn't matter where you are in your life, what stage. Everybody has ability to reach into deeper places. But it's about accessing your soul. That's where it begins with. There's no soulmate without a soul. But it's challenging. One of the biggest challenges is what it says in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch. Beginning of the Code of Jewish Law, it says, Al yevish mepnei amaligim. Do not be embarrassed by those that will mock, will laugh. Don't underestimate peer pressure. We live in a peer pressure world. And it affects tremendously our relationships. What people will think, what the expectations are. Yes, there's a woman who recently got engaged. She's 28 years old, 29 years old, in the Upper West Side. And she tells me she literally feels like a pariah. People think something's the matter with her. How could you get married at 29? Especially the singles that are older than her don't like it. Well, you can imagine why. She said, So I said, maybe you shouldn't be living in a community that doesn't really understand and celebrate with you getting married. But she says they feel like 29. You're too young. You don't have a career yet and stuff like that. I'm just giving an example. This is not based on someone's decision. This became some type of, the blind leading the blind. It became some social new standard. The whole beauty of Torah is that it doesn't buy into standards. Mordechai, everybody bowed to Haman. Mordechai did not. Sometimes you have to stand back and be independent. That's what a Jew really is from the beginning of time, Abraham. And so what if 5 billion people are doing that? Okay, they're doing it. Who says that's the way? That's why, thank God, we have a Torah. And we did not succumb not to Pharaoh, and not to Haman, and not to other thousands and thousands of people who said, why don't you conform a little? And I'm not talking again in a religious context. I'm talking in a psychological context. Having the security, I believe in something. And something's wrong with that standard, and I'm not buying into it. But there's a price to pay. You'll look different, and you may be laughed at. Obviously I'm not suggesting doing it in a corny way. You don't have to add more insult to injury, but the second, how much have we sold out? How much of our own resonating truths completely buried because it's not popular? If I say that to somebody, they'll think I'm nuts. So I would suggest that maybe, if that's the case, maybe the friends you have are not the right friends. Maybe you should find friends that celebrate with you instead of laugh or mock. And I'm not suggesting it's easy. This is not an easy thing. Nobody likes to admit it, but acceptance is a major thing. We are social animals, social creatures. Animals, creatures, you could decide which one you like. And we're affected by our society. We're affected by what others think. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing per se. But Hillel said it all in one line. Im ein anili mili. Ani l'doidi. Ani. If you're not there for yourself, who's going to be there for you? That's the thing I take out of Richard Dawkins' book, the selfish. That selfish part. You have to initiate. It's you. And then he says, if I'm only for myself, who am I? So, obviously, I asked thousands and thousands of people, of audiences I've spoken to, are there any conformists in this room? Nobody ever raises their hand. Maybe once in a while, one person, usually very elderly people. So I could report to you, based on people's acknowledgement, there are no conformists on earth. So where are all the conformists? Because conformists do not want to admit they're conformists, obviously. That's the point. But as they say, as I mentioned this, they say in the world of journalism, I come from a family of journalists, my father, that there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. So the question is, who are you? I'd like to believe, we all would like to believe that we make things happen from time to time. I'm not saying everybody is a pure leader, but everyone in their domain has elements where you need to lead. Ani, the deity, where you need to initiate. And that's what starts creating change. Now obviously this requires support and requires wise counsel. I'm not just suggesting going out as being a maverick and taking on every crusade. But if you take on that attitude, and I think it's a great way to begin the new year, the first resolution, that attitude, and find small things where you can initiate, it'll open new doors, no question about it. People want to be around people who initiate. They like that confidence, they like that someone's thinking. And you can do it in small ways, as I said. There are many ways I could suggest, but that's one of the key things from going from down the spectrum from unhealthy to healthy. It doesn't have to be extreme. It just means you realize that you have more in you than you think you have. And if God means anything, religious view of God is some guy sitting on a throne in heaven with a white beard striking us with lightning when we misbehave. Levi Yitzchak Berditchever said to the self-proclaimed atheist, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. So if it's a guy with a beard like that, I would probably fit into the atheist category. But the real meaning of God at the end of the day is that you either worship yourself or you worship something greater than yourself. Two options. A God means that don't be so convinced about your own self-perception. You may think you don't have it in you. God created you, gave you faculties. Maybe you're not aware of all your strengths. Don't be so smug or pompous about how much you can achieve or you can't achieve. Arrogance can take on inverted shape of feeling I don't have it in me. The point of a God, the point of Torah is to take and say, whatever you think you can be 1,000 times more than that. That's the whole point. Showing you standards you may never have even dreamed of. That's what real leaders do. That's what mentors do. That's what good coaches do. And frankly, it's not always because they see it, but they give you that attitude, You see any type, whether it's in sports or in athletic or in anything, a good coach will show you heights you have not seen and say, now you've reached here, let's try a little more. This is essentially, in a nutshell, the whole Judaism. It gives us heights that are far beyond that most humans would ever imagine. That you can reach the divine itself. Everybody's always searched for paradise, for fountain of youth, eternity. They built the Tower of Babel. They wanted to find God. We all do this. The pharaohs of old try to find eternity one way. Everybody's looking for that transcendence. And the answer in Jewish thought is that you can reach the greatest heights. You need a measure of humility, and a measure of persistence, of vigilance, which are also features of a healthy person. They don't give up quickly. They believe in something, they keep going. Obviously, they have to check whether it's folly or whether their objectives are sound. Sometimes you pursue something that you shouldn't be pursuing. But if it's something they believe in and it's worth pursuing, they'll not give up. There's no such thing as, didn't work out. They'll figure out a way. And they don't always get what they want, but they don't give up anyway. Moses, again, an example of that. These are people who, because what their standards are not what's good for me, it's what's good. It's not just what I want or I need. I need, then you lose the mood and I don't need it anymore. But if it's something that is worth the value because you believe in it, because it's a God-given mandate or something like that, then you go all the way, you fight. Today we don't really know this concept of all the way. Today, most young people, you ask them, what are you ready to fight for and die for? It's a foreign concept. I'm not suggesting anyone should ever die, but I mean conceptually. Most people say, that the Red Sox should go into the World Series, or that this team should win or lose, or some video game, or some soap opera character should, turn into whatever it may be. It's all vicarious experiences that have nothing to do with reality, because we live in a free world, a world of comfort, where we're not forced to crystallize our values to even define what are you ready to fight for. It's actually part of the blessing of our times. But the curse is that you end up being very mediocre. What do you stand for? What's the line you will not cross in this life? Most people, we don't even think like that. So how crystallized can our missions and our soul missions be? So for most people, crystallization comes usually in making money and business success on that level. Now that's where I demonstrate my focus and so on. But that's a focus around survival, around more material things. Love, on the other hand, that we're discussing is about the eternal search. So I hope some of the things I've said here are valuable and can help frame this whole idea a little differently, using the model of Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li, finding what healthy love is as opposed to unhealthy love. You can rest assured you probably have a mixture of both. I don't think anybody's just unhealthy, and I don't think this is just pure healthy. The question is identifying what is healthy, what's not. And the first step is ready to look at yourself honestly, soberly, with integrity, and maybe having an objective person to help you look at it. That's the first step, because if you do that, then you say, okay, here are different situations. You may not like what you find, but at least you're looking. That's why the month of El is called a Chodesh HaCheshbon. It's a month of accountability. It's accounting. What are you accounting for? You're counting, you're peering inside your own, examining, inspecting your own soul, your spiritual state of being, your psychological state of being, your fears, and your loves. And this is one of the main reasons I wrote 60 Days, because there's a longer story behind it, which I've shared in the past. I felt that such a powerful period of time, why not use it in a way that can help us actually, day by day, grow? So I turned it into more of a workbook. Instead of just a book with ideas, it's much easier to do things day by day. Here's a day, an exercise with a day. And then after 30 days, you realize, hey, 30 exercises cover a lot more than you think. So tell somebody, listen, let's do 30 exercises. No one's going to have time for that. Day by day, one at a time, a thought at a time. That's how always things work. Like Rabbi Akiva learned from the drops of water. You want to pierce a stone, it's not about hammers and artillery. Take water, drop by drop by drop, day by day. The Chinese turned it into Chinese water torture. That's the negative side. The positive side is persistence. Consistent, persistent, step by step. You'll see every business 101 manual of success, they always tell you about that. It's the persistence. Now, obviously, you need to know where to be persistent, where not to be, but things are always complicated. But persistence is a major element in almost anything in life. So as we begin the month of El, I want to wish everyone a month of Ani L'Deidi. I am to my beloved to me, that hopefully you can discover your real soulmate, and that you are ready. As they say, the teacher comes when the student is ready. The same thing here. The love will come when the love is there. It's like the face reflecting in the water. And words that come from the heart enter the heart. That's how it works. It's a reciprocal thing. Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li. And those of you that have already found your soulmate, or not sure, should come to that type of clarity, or recognize it. And those that know for sure have to always renew our vows, have to always renew these relationships. I see there's a lot of giggling going on, so I'm sure everybody's got a whole nice story. Maybe one day we'll compare notes. But not necessarily. I'm fine to be the one that just talks about it, and you can do with it as you see fit inside your own psyches. The bottom line is that, as I always tell people, I have my dancing shoes ready. You just tell me the day, I'll be at your wedding. Okay? And since we have a couple here that we just celebrated a marrying, Rachel and Jeff, I had the honor to be there. So may your love and the relationship spill over. There's things called viruses. There's healthy viruses, unhealthy viruses. A healthy virus is when something goes viral. It's like allergic. Not allergic, I'm sorry, contagious, I should have said. So hopefully it spills over like a ripple effect. And all of you here, just know, individually I say this to all of you, you are all invaluable human beings. I would say souls. It's like Michelangelo said, I saw the angel trapped in the marble I carved and set her free. So you're these angels. And we're called indispensable musical notes. Much more valuable than you ever think. Remember, God created you, and God doesn't create junk. So every one of you has a unique and indispensable role to play. And every day that passes that you're not living up to it, it's like you're not living up to who you are. We have a lot of distractions. We are occupied more with the means than with the ends. It's called in Hebrew, tafel and nikr. There's the primary objectives and there's the secondary. Often the secondary become the primary. Like the guy that gave that course in time management. So he brought it into a classroom. He brought in several bags. It's a big empty aquarium. Takes out bag number 1 with big large boulders and puts them into the aquarium and then says, okay, is this aquarium full? Some say yes, some say no. He opens bag number 2 and it has small rocks. And he fills the rocks, fill the crevices. Is it full now? More people said yes. So he builds a third bag. The third bag has fine gravel. And he pours that in. Is it full now? Well, they saw there's another bag, so they realized. But it looks full to them. Everything's full. Now what? What else can he put in there? He opens the next bag. It's a few pitchers of water. And he pours it in, so obviously the water fills in whatever gaps. Water is less dense. So now it's spilling over. Okay, it's full. What do we learn from this? So the smart Alex in the class who know they're taking time management course say, we learn from this that as full as your day is, you could always fill it more. You could always put more things in, which is, basic. He said, no, that's not the main lesson. The lesson is that if you don't get the boulders in first, you're never going to get them in. If you don't have your priorities first, the foundations, you're not going to get them in. We often get so preoccupied with the minutia, the water, the gravel, the little stones and this, and your foundations are not there. Get your foundations in place. And then you build upon that. So it's an interesting twist. You wouldn't think of that in time management. You'd think, you know what? Let me figure out how to make the closet more efficient. I'll stick more stuff in it. Sometimes you have to figure out what's in the closet in the first place. So here's a good month to explore the boulders. What are the priorities? Are your priorities in place? Are you busy with other things? Why? Now it's not easy exercise because remember, the inertia of status quo is very powerful. We don't even know the power it exerts because you're locked in place. But it's exerting tremendous power. Try to change a habit and you'll find out how powerful your status quo is. So Elul, we have, thank God, a month, once a year, a new moon, a new change, the power to shift the status quo. That's the key. So my blessing is that status quo should shift just a bit. It's about quality here than quantity. And guaranteed the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur will be a different sort. Thank you very much. So I want to announce that Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night. And please, if you want to sign up for these are free emails, 60 days. The books are available if you like. And I welcome to continue the journey with you now through the 60-day journey and toward love and beyond.